So I looked up some data and I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting. What I didn't expect to find was a pattern across 39 nations that explains everything. And I mean everything. There is a singular reason for falling birth rates.
Japan seems to be at the forefront of this, as does South Korea.
On average, every day, 2 schools close in Japan, and that's been going on for 15 years. Stroller sales for pets are now outstripping strollers for kids. That's in South Korea, and I believe it's true in Japan too. There are people out there trying to block messages, and one of the messages they're trying to block is educating women about fertility. A woman turning 28 in the UK has a 50-50% chance of ever becoming a mother at 28. There are some people who literally want humanity to die. This is a civilization ending.
In that case, what do we do?
Yes. Welcome back to Triggernometry, the podcast that pretends to be a temple of free thought, but is in reality nothing more than a badly lit panic room for mediocre men in suits who have mistaken reading the Daily Telegraph for becoming public intellectuals. And here they sit, like 2 lobotomized ushers at the world's most depressing theater, nodding along to the gospel according to Stephen Shaw, a man whose greatest contribution to human civilization is discovering that if you delay having children, you delay having children. Stop the presses, alert the Vatican, someone give this man a medal for tautology. Let's begin with the guest, since he's the supposed oracle of this farce. Stephen Shaw, the man who stares at a bell curve until 3 in the morning, emailing himself like a deranged stockbroker who thinks Gaussian distribution is divine revelation. He gazes upon a symmetrical line on a graph and declares with the passion of a cult leader, there is a singular reason for falling birth rates. Oh yes, humanity trembles at this discovery. And what is this singular reason? People are having children later. Well done, Stephen. You've just reinvented the concept of waiting. By this logic, the singular reason I'm not eating dinner right now is because I'm not eating dinner yet. Genius. Nobel Prize in stating the obvious. And these 2 podcast buffoons lap it up like thirsty dogs. Francis leans in, nodding sagely, as though he's just been told the key to quantum mechanics rather than the world's most banal demographic observation. Constantine jumps in with his favorite party trick. Well, when my wife and I had our first son at 39, yes, Constantine, we know, we always know, because you remind us every single episode. You could be interviewing a beekeeper about honey production, and you'd still find a way to shoehorn in your late 30s fatherhood saga. The rest of us are trying to survive your show without slipping into a coma, and you're out here writing your autobiography mid-interview. Newsflash. Your personal anecdote is not a universal data point. It's just proof that you were too busy grifting for podcast sponsors to breed earlier. And what sponsors they are, because nothing screams intellectual rigor like interrupting your sermon on civilizational collapse to hawk VPNs, senolytic pills, and cocoa powder that helps you sleep. One moment it's Japan is collapsing, society is ending, the elderly are killing themselves from loneliness, and the next it's, by the way, try Beam Dream Hot Chocolate, only 15 calories and clinically proven to knock you out. Gentlemen, this isn't a podcast, it's a fucking QVC segment with extra steps. You're not Socratic truth seekers, you're desperate infomercial salesmen, turning demographic collapse into a coupon code. Trigger 333 for 33% off your first 6 months of breeder panic. Now back to Shaw and his endless metaphors. He compares fertility decline to fish running downstream from bears. Yes, truly illuminating. The problem, you see, is not economics, not freedom, not climate catastrophe, not student debt or collapsing institutions. It's fucking bears. Apparently, the salmon of civilization are hiding in some demographic backwater because society grew too scary. And the hosts nod, as if this metaphor isn't the intellectual equivalent of comparing the Holocaust to forgetting your car keys. Francis even says, "Forgive me for interrogating it," like a child asking permission to speak at the grown-up table. Interrogating? Francis, you couldn't interrogate a ham sandwich. You sat there while a man explained civilization with sock hop and salmon analogies, and you called that wisdom. That's not interrogation, that's foreplay for idiocy. Then Shaw unleashes his magnum opus, the dance hall metaphor. Imagine, he says, The old days when everyone went dancing at 8 sharp, buzzing with energy. But then the owner extended the hours, and the vibe was ruined. People trickled in. No one paired off. Entropy, disorder, blah, blah, blah. Yes, Stephen, you've cracked it. Society's fertility crisis explained by disco scheduling. The entire fate of nations reduced to a fucking sock hop with bad timing. How profound. I half expected him to pull out a glitter ball and start humming ABBA. And Constantine, rather than laughing this man out of the room, responds with a pained look of confusion, as if someone just explained algebra to a goldfish. But Shaw doesn't stop there. He drags his film crew into Japanese suburbs, following his poor language teacher back to her childhood playground so he can film her crying at closed shops and lonely pharmacies. See, he declares, this is what happens when people don't have children. No, Stephen, this is what happens when you deliberately exploit people's nostalgia and grief to sell your breeder propaganda. Loneliness is not solved by mass-producing babies. It's solved by building communities that don't abandon the elderly. But of course, you don't care about community. You care about weaponizing sadness into guilt. Old people become your horror props. Their loneliness repackaged as an argument for mandatory womb service. It's grotesque, manipulative, and about as scientific as reading tea leaves. And what do our two hosts contribute during this manipulative charade? Francis whimpers about the visceral pain of seeing a deserted playground. Oh yes, Francis, truly tragic. Empty swings are apparently the end of civilization. I'm sure the children in sweatshops and war zones would be touched to know you mourn playground aesthetics more than actual suffering. Constantine piles on, gasping about nappies, stroller sales, and the horror of pet ownership outpacing child rearing. Imagine the fear in their voices. Dogs and strollers! Civilization is finished. Gentlemen, if a Pomeranian in a pram terrifies you, perhaps you're not the intellectual vanguard you claim to be. Perhaps you're just idiots with microphones panicking over pet accessories. And then comes Shaw's favorite boogeyman, the antinatalists. Ah, yes, the evil cabal poisoning classrooms, blocking fertility education, whispering into the ears of innocent women. Don't have kids, Karen. Enjoy your life. As if a scattered group of philosophers and pessimists are somehow responsible for collapsing birth rates across 39 nations. Please, governments pour billions into pronatalist propaganda. Religions scream, be fruitful and multiply from every pulpit. And yet, a few antinatalist blogs are apparently collapsing civilization. If we had that much influence, Stephen, you wouldn't even have an audience. The idea that a philosophy rooted in compassion is equivalent to a global conspiracy is laughable. You need villains, and we fit the role. Congratulations, you've turned us into the Illuminati of loneliness. And here's the hypocrisy. Shaw moans about assisted suicide laws, teaching the elderly their burdens. But in the same breath, he's perfectly happy teaching young women that they're failures if they don't turn their wombs into mortgage subsidies. Burden guilt for the old. Terrible. Burden guilt for the fertile? Totally fine. His compassion is as selective as his data sets. And the hosts, of course, don't challenge this contradiction. They just sit there, wide-eyed, lapping it up. Now, let's mock the economics. Constantine insists that in the 1970s, one man could support a family, and now it's harder, so maybe that's the problem. Finally, a reasonable thought. And how does Shaw respond? By waving it away. Economics only explains 6%. 6%. This man genuinely believes that housing costs, wage stagnation, student debt, childcare expenses, and precarious jobs barely influence fertility. Apparently, people drowning in bills are childless purely because of Gaussian destiny. No, Stephen, that's not science. That's numerology. You may as well say Mars is in retrograde. But here's the kicker. Even when confronted with his own son's late marriage and career focus, Shaw can't admit that economics drives choices. Instead, he shrugs and says, well, when people get more money, they just take more vacations. This is his analysis. This is the intellectual depth of a man they treat like a prophet. Civilization isn't collapsing because of capitalism's rot. No, it's collapsing because millennials prefer city breaks to babies. Fuck me, if this is what counts as expertise, then I'm Aristotle. And let's laugh harder at Hungary. Shaw parades Orban's baby bribe mortgage scheme as proof pronatalism works. Have children, get debt forgiveness. Nothing says sacred family bond like turning your offspring into financial coupons. Imagine being conceived not because your parents wanted you, but because the state offered them a bigger house. That's not love, that's exploitation. And even then, the numbers barely budged. The hosts swoon at this policy, as if Orban has cracked the code of civilization. No, you gullible clowns, he's just buying wombs like commodities. This isn't salvation. It's state-sponsored prostitution of parenthood. Then there's the biology sermon. Shaw claims women are ignorant about fertility, duped into thinking they can conceive at 38. He says this with a straight face, as though every magazine, every doctor, every smug relative hasn't been screaming about the biological clock for decades. Women know. They're not idiots. They just don't want children on your schedule. But you can't handle that truth, so you infantilize them, insisting they're tricked. And the hosts nod, pretending this isn't misogyny dressed as awareness. And finally, the pièce de résistance, the anti-human smear. Shaw declares antinatalism anti-human. Oh yes, what a devastating critique. Because nothing says pro-human like forcing billions into existence to suffer, starve, and die. Also, a few economists can sleep at night. Meanwhile, anti-natalists, who actually argue for the reduction of suffering, are the monsters. Wonderful inversion, Stephen. Truly Orwellian. And the hosts, like the obedient idiots they are, clutch their pearls and gasp. Some people literally want humanity to die. Yes, gentlemen, some of us do. Because humanity is a destructive tenant in the house of Earth, leaving shit stains on every room it enters. Wanting humanity to end is not anti-human, it's pro-everything else. But of course you can't grasp that because your worldview begins and ends with the assumption that babies are sacred. So here we are. A guest whose arguments are tautologies dressed as revelations, whose metaphors are so bad they should be criminal, whose compassion is weaponized grief, and whose villains are imaginary antinatalist bogeymen, and two hosts who are nothing more than hype men for bullshit, giggling through their ad reads, pretending to be brave while being intellectually neutered. Together, they create a podcast that is neither insightful nor challenging. It's a breeder panic infomercial, a pseudo-intellectual circle jerk for men who think nappies sales are prophecy. And now we arrive at the part where Stephen Shaw and his two clapping seals discover South America. This is where the farce morphs into outright self-parody. Shaw gasps in horror. Brazil's fertility is down to 1.64, this Catholic country that celebrated big families. And the hosts react like schoolboys who just saw their first naked woman. Shock, awe, catastrophe. Civilization is surely collapsing now that Brazilians have realized breeding like rabbits isn't a prerequisite for joy. Listen carefully. When a Catholic country known for its carnival, its poverty, its sprawling favelas, and economic inequality decides that maybe pumping out 6 kids isn't the best plan, that isn't tragedy. That's progress. That's women no longer trapped in a perpetual cycle of exhaustion. That's families realizing children aren't mandatory decorations for your faith. But of course, Shaw interprets this as doom, and Francis and Constantine nod like bobbleheads, as though Brazil discovering family planning is akin to the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. Then Shaw trots out his field work. He spent 3 weeks filming in 6 countries. 3 weeks! Imagine the gall. Demographers spend entire careers parsing census data. But Stephen here takes a fortnight vacation with a camera crew and thinks he's cracked Latin American fertility. This is not science. This is tourism dressed as research. I had to see it for myself, he says, like a Victorian explorer peering at exotic tribes. No, Stephen, you didn't need to see anything. The data is available. You flew across the globe to film sad playgrounds and pretend you discovered something anthropology hadn't already known for decades. You're not Darwin on the Beagle. You're a middle-aged man doing demographic cosplay. And the hosts? Do they call this out? Of course not. They beam. They lap it up. Francis reminisces about Venezuela, Constantine sighs theatrically, and suddenly they're treating Shaw's holiday slideshow like it's gospel. The intellectual depth of this podcast is shallower than a puddle in the Sahara. Then comes their next act of melodrama, the aging crisis. What about the elderly in Brazil? What about India aging without resources? They wring their hands as though they care, but what they really mean is, who will wipe our asses in the nursing home if the youth refuse to reproduce? Because that's what this all boils down to. Their panic isn't about loneliness or dignity or care. It's about the economics of exploitation. They don't want a society that respects the elderly. They want a society that breeds a permanent underclass of caretakers. More babies, more workers, more hands to sponge the drool off the chins of these podcasters when they're 80 and still crying about woke culture. Shaw delivers this with the gravitas of a man unveiling the next plague. This is a humanitarian crisis. No, Stephen, a humanitarian crisis is famine, war, genocide, not fewer babies being born in Sao Paulo. The crisis you describe is capitalism's terror that its labor pyramid is shrinking. And you, sir, are not a humanitarian. You are a mouthpiece for the breeder-industrial complex, weaponizing pity for old people as an excuse to conscript the young into unpaid reproductive labor. And then, as if their hysteria hasn't yet reached operatic levels, the hosts bring up Cuba and North Korea. Oh yes, here we go. Why is fertility falling even in Cuba, even in North Korea, where child care is free? Ah, behold the smoking gun, as if dictatorships are natural experiments in the wonders of family planning. These two actually believe they've uncovered some paradox by noting that in authoritarian states, people also aren't having kids. You imbeciles! People in Cuba and North Korea live under regimes of scarcity, repression, and uncertainty. Free childcare doesn't override the fact that your government is a prison camp with parades. It's not proof of mysterious forces beyond economics. It's proof that misery doesn't inspire procreation. No one looks at breadlines and secret police and thinks, perfect environment to raise a toddler. But Constantine and Francis, in their infinite wisdom, treat this as a profound puzzle. Constantine leans forward, brow furrowed, as though he's discovered a riddle that would stump Oedipus. Francis nods gravely, like a priest about to declare the second coming. Gentlemen, it isn't a paradox. It's common fucking sense. When life sucks, people don't rush to multiply the suffering. Stop pretending Cuba's fertility stats are a cosmic enigma. You don't need a PhD to figure out that people trapped in political and economic despair don't see let's have 5 children as a viable plan. But let's not stop there. Let's laugh at their crocodile tears about schools closing. Oh, the humanity. A deserted playground, shuttered shops, a lonely photo of the last student in a class. Shaw lingers on these images like a funeral director trying to upsell the bereaved. Look, he says, this boy is the last child in the school, all alone, as though it's a tragedy worthy of global mourning. In reality, it's just demographics adjusting to reality. But Shaw needs imagery. He needs pathos. He needs to weaponize the sadness of one lonely child to sell his Gaussian cult. And the hosts? They fall for it like toddlers spotting a shiny object. Francis whimpers about visceral pain. Constantine compares it to movie audiences drying up in the 1980s. Brilliant analogy, Constantine. Yes, schools and Top Gun sequels are basically the same thing. The mind reels at your intellectual prowess. But let's call this what it is. Propaganda. Emotional pornography designed to bypass reason. They don't want you thinking about whether fewer children might mean better resources, less environmental destruction, or less suffering. No, they want you sobbing over empty swings and ghost classrooms so you'll swallow the breeder agenda whole. It's a cheap trick, and it works only because their audience is as gullible as they are. And now, women's education. Oh yes, the delicate dance they must perform. Francis cracks his little joke about ending women's education, pretending to be ironic while half the audience nods along. Shaw wrings his hands, saying, "Of course, I'd never want to take rights away. I just want to raise awareness." Ah yes, awareness, that wonderful euphemism for manipulation. What he really means is, we can't admit outright that we'd prefer women barefoot and pregnant, so instead we'll guilt-trip them with graphs about unplanned childlessness. Here's the truth they will never admit. Women are not broken for rejecting the breeder contract. Women are not ignorant for choosing careers, passions, or lives free from children. They know exactly what they're doing. They've watched their mothers sacrificed on the altar of motherhood, their ambitions gutted, their lives reduced to servitude. They've chosen differently. That isn't ignorance, that's resistance. And it terrifies Shaw and his hosts, because it proves civilization doesn't crumble when women say no. It just evolves into something they can't control. But the hypocrisy runs deeper. Shaw talks about sabbaticals for motherhood, as if companies should just pause careers for 5 years while women pop out kids, then slot them back into the workforce like nothing happened. He genuinely believes corporations will happily accommodate state-mandated womb breaks. This isn't policy, it's fantasy. It's the fever dream of a man who's never had to choose between daycare costs and rent, who thinks human lives can be reorganized like Excel spreadsheets. And Constantine and Francis nod solemnly, as though this utopia of career breeding sabbaticals is anything but delusional. Then comes the pièce de résistance, their dishonesty about biology. They lament that society lies to women about their fertile years, promising them too much, deceiving them into thinking they can have it all. But the real dishonesty is theirs, because what they don't say, what they never say, is that biology doesn't guarantee joy. Biology doesn't guarantee love or stability or purpose. Biology only guarantees suffering. Every child born is a future corpse. Every pregnancy carries risks. Every parenthood is a gamble with another life. But they can't admit that truth because it undermines their cult. So they dress up biology as destiny, as sacred duty, and then cry that we're all dishonest for refusing to genuflect. Let's be blunt. Constantine, Francis, and Stephen Shaw are not truth-tellers. They are priests of breeder religion, shilling pseudoscience, and sob stories between discount codes. Their podcast is not philosophy. It's not even journalism. It's a late-night infomercial for pronatalist propaganda, complete with tragic B-roll and trembling anecdotes. And they themselves? They're not intellectuals. They're not brave. They're not challenging taboos. They're idiots. Idiots with microphones, selling their audience fear of empty playgrounds while giggling through ad reads for cocoa. And so we reach the crescendo of this carnival of idiocy, the part where Shaw, flanked by his 2 podcast cheerleaders, stares into the abyss of his own bad metaphors and declares with solemn gravity, "This is civilization ending." Ah, yes, the melodramatic prophecy. Every cult needs an apocalypse, and Shaw has found his. Not war, not plague, not climate collapse, not nuclear annihilation, but the horror of people not pumping out enough babies to satisfy his Gaussian fetish. Truly, this is the most pathetic eschatology ever devised. Forget the book of Revelation. Our doom is written in diaper sales. Civilization ending, he says. Civilization, as though civilization is some holy artifact rather than a messy pile of exploitation, slavery, war, famine, and strip malls. Tell me, Stephen, what precisely is worth preserving here? The 9-to-5 grind? The Amazon warehouses? The endless parade of children born only to become exhausted wage slaves paying off debts until they collapse in nursing homes you fetishize as cautionary tales? If that's civilization, perhaps it deserves to end. Perhaps your Gaussian bell curve flattening isn't the herald of apocalypse, but the long-awaited mercy killing of a species too stupid to stop breeding itself into ecological ruin. But of course, Shaw cannot conceive of this. For him, fewer babies is the greatest sin imaginable. Civilization is not defined by art, by justice, by compassion. Civilization is defined by how many wombs are in service. He reduces the entire human project to a fertility chart, and his podcast hosts nod like parishioners at Mass. Francis practically weeps at the thought of civilization ending, while Constantine furrows his brow, as though this is the first profound thought he's ever encountered outside of his own reflection. And yet, notice what they never address. Notice what they carefully avoid. They never once ask, if civilization depends on perpetual growth, is it even sustainable? If a society collapses because people stop breeding, Maybe the problem isn't childlessness. Maybe the problem is the fragile, cancerous system built on endless expansion. But they will never ask this, because to them, the system is sacred. Growth is sacred. Babies are sacred. It is a religion, and they are its preachers, incapable of heresy. Instead, we get their solutions, and what glorious solutions they are. Sabbaticals for womb duty, lifelong learning programs, mortgages tied to baby production. They pitch these half-baked fantasies with the zeal of visionaries. But they're not visionaries. They're salesmen in a pyramid scheme, desperately recruiting more recruits before the base collapses. Imagine the absurdity. Join a company, take 5 years off to crank out children, then return as though nothing happened, as if capitalism is going to patiently wait while you disappear into motherhood. This is not policy. This is wishful thinking on steroids. It's like suggesting we solve climate change by giving everyone free fans. And mortgages for babies. Oh yes, the Hungarian miracle. Have a child, erase your debt. Because nothing says family like turning your offspring into government-issued coupons. That isn't a pro-family policy. It's state-sanctioned breeding prostitution. It reduces children to financial assets, wombs to ATMs, and yet Shaw drools over it as if Viktor Orban has single-handedly reinvented civilization. Meanwhile, Constantine and Francis fawn over this scheme, pretending it's a genius policy rather than transparent bribery. Gentlemen, if your solution to civilization's collapse is make babies or pay us back, you're not philosophers. You're loan sharks. But my favorite part is their dishonesty about choice. Shaw insists, over and over, that no one should be forced to have children, that it's all about awareness. Oh, how noble. And yet every word he speaks, every graph he brandishes, every sob story he films is designed to pressure, manipulate, and guilt people into breeding. It's not force, he insists. It's just gentle persuasion, backed by state policy, cultural panic, and relentless propaganda. This is the oldest trick in the authoritarian playbook. Deny coercion while manufacturing consent through fear. And the hosts grin like hyenas, happy to peddle this doublethink because it flatters their egos. And then, the pièce de résistance of their hypocrisy, their obsession with biology. They moan that society lies to women about fertility, promising them too much time. They posture as brave truth-tellers, daring to say what no one else will, that women are most fertile in their 20s. As if this is some forbidden secret, rather than common knowledge screamed by every tabloid, every aunt, every gynecologist. Women know. They're not stupid. They just don't care to live their lives as livestock for Shaw's demographic spreadsheet. But he can't admit that, because admitting that would mean conceding that women have agency. Real agency, not the fake agency he pretends to grant them by offering awareness. And Francis, smug little Francis, jumps in with his sanctimonious drivel about dishonesty in society, how we're lying to ourselves, denying our biology, pretending we're younger than we are. Ah, yes, thank you, Francis, for this stunning insight. Truly, you are the Socrates of YouTube, except, no, you're not. You're a failed comedian cosplaying as an intellectual, parroting breeder, talking points with all the wit of a damp sponge. You are not brave for saying women can't have babies forever. You are boring, condescending, and utterly transparent. And Constantine, with his endless anecdotes, never fails to turn the conversation back to himself. Well, my wife and I had our son at 39. Yes, Constantine, we know. You've said it 3 times already. Your personal life is not data, and it is certainly not profound. Stop pretending your late fatherhood is proof of anything other than your inability to shut the fuck up. You are not a philosopher. You are a narcissist with a microphone. But perhaps the most insulting part of all is their constant whining about antinatalists. They frame us as poison, as manipulators, as anti-human villains lurking in classrooms. They accuse us of spreading despair, of tricking women, of wanting humanity to die. Well, here I am, antinatalist incarnate, and I'll say it plainly. Yes, humanity's extinction would be a mercy. Not because I hate people, but because I hate suffering. Because every child born is guaranteed to suffer and to die. Because existence itself is a lottery with losing tickets stapled to every soul. You call that anti-human? I call it pro-compassion. You call it nihilism? I call it honesty. You, on the other hand, are the true anti-humans, chaining women to wombs, condemning billions to toil and despair, just so your precious Gaussian curve doesn't sag. And let's not forget the ads. Ah, yes, the sacred lifeblood of this podcast. Shaw may cry about civilization, but Constantine and Francis cry harder if they can't hawk their discount codes. Senolytics, sleep cocoa, privacy VPNs, all jammed between sermons about demographic collapse. Imagine the grotesque irony. The elderly are killing themselves from loneliness. And speaking of death, why not buy our miracle anti-aging supplement? It's not philosophy, it's parody. These men are not intellectuals. They are carnival barkers peddling fear by the pound and hope by the discount. And so the rant reaches its end. We have a guest whose arguments collapse under the weight of their own banality, a man who discovered nothing but dares to call it revelation. We have hosts who masquerade as brave truth-tellers but are in reality intellectual toddlers, too timid to challenge their guest, too greedy to refuse his panic porn. We have a podcast that pretends to be about free thought but is in reality a glorified infomercial for breeder propaganda. So let me say it plainly, with the contempt it deserves. Stephen Shaw is a pseudo-scientific charlatan, addicted to his graphs and metaphors, incapable of genuine insight. Francis and Constantine are sycophantic clowns, grifters in cheap suits, nodding along to idiocy while shilling discount codes. Their podcast is not a beacon of reason, it's a septic tank of breeder panic, bubbling with fear and manipulation. And their arguments are trash. Circular, shallow, dishonest trash. And I, the brain, stand here to tell you, they are wrong. Their hysteria is wrong. Their metaphors are wrong. Their conclusions are wrong. Civilization will not end because people stop having children. Civilization will end because it is built on suffering, exploitation, and endless growth. And when that end comes, it will not be a tragedy. It will be a liberation, a mercy, an end to the grotesque comedy of existence these fools cling to. So let them weep over empty playgrounds. Let them wail about nappies and strollers. Let them drown in their Gaussian curves. Because while they panic over the death of their precious breeder cult, the rest of us will know the truth, that fewer children is not the end of the world. It is the beginning of its redemption, and no amount of podcasts, propaganda, or discount codes will ever change that.